In a single night, 8,000 Americans vanished from the wealthiest city in Texas. Not wounded, not displaced, gone, swept off a barrier island no one believed could fall. The year was 1900 in Galveston. Texas was the most powerful city on the entire Gulf Coast. 3 days before the water rose, a warning was sent that could have saved them all. This was not a poor, unprepared backwater town sitting helpless in the path of a storm. This was a city of electric streetcars, grand opera houses, and its own international shipping port. More millionaires per square mile than New York City, and they all trusted one expert's promise. Drop your city in the comments right now. Have you ever ridden out a major hurricane? That promise was made by America's top weather expert, and it sealed Galveston's fate forever. Tonight, we are pulling apart the deadliest natural disaster in American history, block by block. We will show you exactly who knew, who blocked the warning, and why no one was told. If you have lived on the Gulf Coast, Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, this story belongs to you. Because Galveston is not ancient history, it is the blueprint for every coastal disaster that followed. From Camille to Andrew to Katrina to Sandy, the warning they got wrong keeps repeating itself. But before the water rose, Galveston was the most dazzling city most Americans had never heard of. September 8th, 1900, the sun rose over a city of nearly 40,000 people on a barrier island. Electric streetcars glided down Broadway past Victorian mansions. This was not a frontier town anymore. The third busiest port in the entire nation, cotton bales stacked 3 stories high at the waterfront. Steamships from 4 continents crowded the harbor. Grand opera houses drew performers from Paris and Vienna. The Wall Street of the Southwest, that is what they called it. And they were not wrong. When most of America still burned oil lamps, Galveston already had electric lights and running water. Here is what gets me. The people of Galveston in 1900 felt exactly the way we feel today. Proud of their progress, trusting their technology, certain that modern science had made them safe from nature. But Galveston had a problem, the kind every powerful city tends to ignore until it is too late. The island sat on a narrow ribbon of sand 30 miles long, barely 3 miles wide. Between Galveston and the open Gulf of Mexico, nothing. No protective reef, no barrier, just shallow water. The highest point on the entire island stood only 8.7 feet above mean sea level. If you have driven the Florida Keys or the Outer Banks of North Carolina, you know this feeling. Water on both sides of the road and somewhere in the back of your mind, you wonder. The people of Galveston wondered too, but they had a credentialed expert telling them not to worry. His name was Isaac Cline, chief meteorologist for Galveston, trusted by every leader on the island. In 1891, Cline published an article that residents of Galveston quoted like scripture for the next 9 years. His conclusion? It was impossible for any storm to create a surge that could seriously threaten the city. Impossible. That one word written by a government scientist became Galveston's official death sentence. Here is the part that haunts this story. His reasoning sounded completely scientific and reasonable at the time. He believed the shallow offshore waters would break apart any hurricane long before it could reach the island. It sounds plausible until you understand how storm surge actually works and what shallow water really does. Think about Hurricane Andrew in 1992. Scientists said South Florida was protected by the waters of Biscayne Bay. They were wrong about that too. Same false logic, different city, different decade, same catastrophic result. In Galveston, no seawall was built, no evacuation plan existed. The city stood completely open to the sea. And Cline's 1891 article gave every city leader a scientific reason to do exactly nothing for 9 years. But here's the truth. There was a second man whose decision mattered even more than Cline's article. His name was Willis Moore, and in 1895 he was appointed chief of the U.S. Weather Bureau. Moore ruled the Weather Bureau with an iron fist, no personal judgment, no intuition, no deviation allowed. He banned observers from using the words hurricane or tornado in any public bulletin without his express permission. The stated reason? Prevent public panic. The real reason was something far darker and deeply personal. Because in Havana, Cuba, a group of Jesuit priests were doing something that infuriated Willis Moore completely. At the Belen Observatory, they were tracking hurricanes with a precision no American government agency could match for decades. Cuban meteorologists at Belen had predicted Caribbean storms before any U.S. scientist even detected them. Their accuracy surpassed the United States Weather Bureau consistently, year after year, storm after storm. Willis Moore knew this, and for a man with his pride, it was simply unacceptable. Has a government agency ever ignored better information because of pride or politics? Drop your thoughts below. In 1898, after the Spanish-American War, Moore signed a directive now preserved in U.S. government archives. It ordered all Cuban meteorological communications blocked from transmission to his bureau entirely and permanently. Official reason: prevent alarmist reports from disturbing markets. Real effect: silence the only eyes that mattered. With one signature, Moore silenced the only people in the hemisphere who could see what was coming. 8,000 Americans would pay for that signature, but for now, the storm was still just forming. Late August, 1900, off the coast of West Africa. A tropical disturbance formed over warm, open water. It crossed the Atlantic and organized into a full hurricane before it even reached the Caribbean Sea. September 4th. The storm slammed into Cuba. Winds exceeded 100 miles per hour, flooding devastated towns. Father Lorenzo Ganguetti at the Belen Observatory watched with practiced eyes and knew this one was different. More powerful, more organized, moving north straight for the Gulf of Mexico and the Texas coast. He sent urgent telegrams to Washington. September 5th, a first warning, intercepted. September 6th, a second, blocked. September 7th, a third, more desperate dispatch, mentioning the Texas coast by name, intercepted also. Not one word from Havana reached the people of Galveston. The priests tried 3 times blocked. Meanwhile, Moore's bureau issued its own forecast. The storm would curve east and make landfall in Florida. No threat to the Gulf Coast. Citizens were told there was absolutely nothing to prepare for. Anyone who watched the news the night before Katrina understands this silence the gap between official and reality. On September 6th, the storm entered the Gulf of Mexico and began to strengthen, not weaken. A ship captain in the Gulf watched his barometer fall to the lowest reading of his 40-year career. He estimated winds over 100 miles per hour, a Category 3 storm aimed squarely at Texas. It took the Weather Bureau more than a full day to acknowledge what that captain had already seen. Friday, September 7th, Isaac Cline arrived at his office on the 4th floor of the Levee building. His windows looked directly out over the Gulf. The barometer was falling slowly, but noticeably falling. The waves were long, powerful swells from the south, announcing a distant and deadly storm. If this video is hitting home like it right now and subscribe, what happens next will shock you. Cline walked down to the beach and stood at the water's edge, feeling something he could not name. Washington had issued no hurricane warning, and Cline had his own reputation on the line. His 1891 article declaring Galveston immune from hurricanes was still public record, unchallenged, uncorrected. If he raised the alarm and the storm missed Galveston, his career was finished. He decided to wait. Saturday, September 8th. Galvestonians woke to heavy rain and strengthening winds, nothing they hadn't seen before, and the waves were spectacular, 12 to 15 feet high, crashing onto the shore with tremendous force. Families strolled the shoreline as if attending a show. Children laughed as the spray hit their shoes. No one understood what those waves were actually announcing to anyone paying close enough attention. By 9 in the morning, wind had reached 50 miles per hour and something unexpected began. The Gulf was rising from the south, a storm surge pushing onto the island from one direction. But Galveston Bay to the north was also flooding water, pressing in from both directions simultaneously. Survivors of Rita in 2005, Ike in 2008, or Floyd in 1999 know this moment: escape routes, vanishing. The island was being swallowed from 2 sides at once, and there was nowhere left to go. By 10 o'clock, downtown streets were flooded ankle deep. Then knee-deep businesses began to close fast. Families moved valuables to second floors. Some tried to leave, but where could they possibly go? They had homes, businesses, lives built on that island. You do not abandon everything for wind and rain. By 11, the bridges connecting Galveston to the Texas mainland were completely underwater and impassable. The island was cut off from the mainland and the storm had barely even begun its worst. In his office, Isaac Cline finally understood the barometer wasn't falling anymore. It was in free fall. Wind was approaching 70 miles per hour. Water stood 4 feet deep in the streets and rising. This was not just a storm. This was the hurricane he had declared impossible back in 1891. He rushed to send warnings, but the telegraph lines were already down. No communication with the mainland. At 2:30 in the afternoon, he managed one final telegram to Washington, just 2 words: serious danger. The first and only time in his career he had used those words, and it was never relayed. Comment below: has your city ever been let down by a warning that arrived too late to matter? At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, wind speed 120 miles per hour. Storm surge 12 feet above normal and still climbing. Galveston's highest point was 8.7 feet. Think about that. The water was already 4 feet above the highest ground on the entire island. The wooden houses nearest the beach went first, and they did not crumble slowly or gracefully. They exploded. Walls ripped away in seconds. Roofs launched into the howling sky like enormous sheets of paper. And those pieces became weapons, 20-foot timbers, moving at 60 miles per hour through the floodwater. Railroad ties, metal roofing spinning like blades, roof slates flying horizontally with the force of rifle bullets. But something else was happening, something no one had anticipated, and far more terrifying than the wind. As the beachfront houses collapsed, the storm surge pushed their wreckage inland north, toward the city center. Each destroyed house added its timber to a growing, moving mass of debris driven by the surge. The second row fell. The third, the fourth. Every collapsed house feeding the wall moving behind it. A wall of debris 20 feet high, miles wide, moving across the island like a slow avalanche. Subscribe right now, because what comes next in this story is unlike anything most Americans were ever taught. Brick mansions, thought to be safe, were crushed when the debris wall reached them. Stone churches crumbled. Everything in its path was swept away, the sound described by survivors as something not human. Screaming, exploding wood, scraping metal. And beneath all of it, the grinding of millions of tons moving. Think about the most afraid you have ever been in a storm, then multiply that feeling by 10. Near the beach stood the St. Mary's Orphan Asylum, a stone building, massive and thought to be solid. Inside 10 nuns of the Sisters of Charity and 93 orphaned children alone in the storm. As the water rose, the sisters moved the children upstairs, then to the attic when that floor flooded. Now the building itself was beginning to break apart around them. The sisters understood what was coming. Sister Elizabeth Ryan picked up a length of clothesline and began tying the children together waist to waist. If they were going to die, perhaps their bodies would stay together. Perhaps they could be found. Perhaps identified, given a proper burial. Perhaps a family somewhere would know what happened to their child. The nuns tied themselves to the children. The youngest cried. The older children understood what the rope meant. The building collapsed. Of 93 children, 3 survived. They were the ones not tied to the line. 90 children, 10 nuns, 100 lives inside a building every survivor said should have held. When rescuers found them the next morning on the beach, still bound together by the clothesline. If a storm has ever forced you to make an impossible choice, drop your state in the comments. At 7:30 that evening, Isaac Cline was at his home on Avenue Q, 50 neighbors crowded inside. His wife Cora stood beside him, 8 months pregnant. His 3 daughters were close. His brother Joseph, too. Water inside the house was chest deep. The walls shook with every gust from the howling darkness outside. Then they heard it, a rhythmic, heavy grinding from somewhere out in the black floodwater surrounding the house. A railroad trestle, more than 1,000 feet long, had broken free and was moving through the flood. It was moving like a slow battering ram through this darkness aimed directly at the house. It struck the east wall. The structure tilted and cracked, then the walls exploded outward all at once. The roof lifted away. Water. Wood. Darkness. Everything became chaos in an instant, all at once. Isaac found himself underwater, tangled in debris, fighting toward the surface, still clutching 2 of his daughters. He broke the surface. All 3 daughters were alive. His brother Joseph surfaced close by. But Cora, his wife, 8 months pregnant, standing beside him just moments before, was gone. He screamed her name into the wind. Nothing answered but the roar of the storm around him. If you have ever lost someone in a storm, or know someone who did share this for them, 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock that evening, the worst hour in the history of any American city. Wind speed 145 miles per hour. Storm surge more than 15 feet above normal. The entire island of Galveston was underwater in total darkness. No electricity, no light, except lightning. Parents held their children above the waterline as long as strength allowed, then tied them with torn cloth. If they died, they would die together. Some were found that way the next morning, still holding on. Survival that night was random and arbitrary. 2 houses side by side. One lived, one lost everyone. No pattern, no reason, no justice. The kind of randomness that breaks something inside a survivor forever. If you have ever survived when others around you did not, you carry that. We see you. By midnight, the wind began to ease. By 2 in the morning, the storm surge started pulling back. By dawn on September 9th, 1900, the hurricane was gone. And so, in large measure, was Galveston. Sunday morning, the wind had stopped. The water was receding. The city of Galveston was gone. Seen from above, the island looked as though it had been bombed. Entire neighborhoods simply vanished. Where Victorian mansions had lined the streets, empty foundations. Where churches and schools had stood nothing. 3,600 homes destroyed out of 5,000 total. Every single building on the island damaged. The bodies were everywhere, floating in the receding water, hanging from wreckage, buried in collapsed walls, arranged along the beach like driftwood children, women, men, entire families, still holding one another. 6,000 dead, the conservative number, 8,000 the realistic estimate. Some accounts reach 12,000. This is the deadliest natural disaster in United States history, 5 times deadlier than Hurricane Katrina. Hit subscribe, because what the survivors of Galveston built next changed coastal defense science forever. More deaths than the next 6 deadliest American hurricanes combined, and every single one of them preventable. Because entire families vanished with no one left to report them missing, the true count went with them. No coffins for 8,000 people, no cemetery space, no time. They loaded the bodies onto barges. By Tuesday morning, the bodies were washing back to shore, the ocean returning what it had taken. There was only one choice left for 6 weeks. Funeral pyres burned across Galveston Island, day and night. Work crews stacked bodies 30 at a time, poured kerosene, and lit the flames visible from the mainland. Think about your own city, New Orleans, Miami, Charleston, Atlantic City, New York. Is it protected right now? Now came the question that would define everything. Should Galveston simply be abandoned? Should the survivors walk away from the sandbar that had killed their neighbors and destroyed their city? The people of Galveston made a choice that shocked the entire country they were staying. And rebuilding. Not just rebuilding, they were going to make sure nothing like this could ever reach them again. What followed was one of the most audacious engineering projects in American history. It started with a wall. A concrete seawall, 17 feet high, 16 feet thick at the base, stretching the length of the beach. Its face curved outward, engineered to catch incoming waves and deflect their full force upward and away. Engineers consulted the Dutch, a people who had been holding the sea back for 500 years. But the seawall alone was not enough. Galveston's streets still sat barely above sea level. So the survivors undertook a second project, one that had never been attempted anywhere on Earth before. They decided to raise the entire city, every building, every street, every cemetery by human force. 2,146 structures were lifted on giant screwjacks while families still lived inside. The St. Patrick's Church, a 3,000-ton cathedral raised by 700 jacks, turned simultaneously by hand. Residents climbed ladders to reach their front doors, their homes perched on stilts 15 feet in the air. Then engineers pumped millions of cubic yards of sand up from the Gulf floor 4 dredges, 7 years. The wet sand flowed beneath the lifted buildings, dried, and became solid, elevated ground entire neighborhoods raised. In the hardest hit areas, the city grade rose by 17 feet above the wave that had destroyed it. In 1915, another major hurricane struck Galveston, a storm surge 3 inches higher than the one in 1900. Inside the seawall, 11 people died. Outside the wall, in unprotected areas, 275. The difference between those two numbers is the price of listening 15 years too late to save them. Hurricane Carla. 1961, the seawall held. Hurricane Alicia. 1983, the seawall held. Hurricane Ike. 2008, it held. Ike brought a 20-foot storm surge, and the people behind the seawall walked away from it. Willis Moore continued leading the Weather Bureau for 13 more years after Galveston never once held accountable. He was forced out in 1913 not because of Galveston, but over a budget dispute about crop reports. The directive blocking Cuban weather communications was officially rescinded in 1902, 2 full years after the disaster. The internal record lists the reason simply as reorganization of administrative procedures, 8,000 dead procedures. Moore retired and wrote several books on meteorology. The name Galveston does not appear in any of them. He died in Washington in 1927 in his bed, at the age of 82, comfortable, unremarkable, forgotten. Galveston was not about the weather. It was about what happens when pride and power bury the truth. One warning silenced, one city erased, 8,000 lives that did not have to be lost. Remember Galveston, remember what the sea can do. Stay curious, stay humble, stay prepared.